Let's begin. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Monica Wedlock-Kilpatrick, and I serve as the Director of Connect Ministries for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. As we get started, I would like to inform you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on the NBA website at nbacares.org/prison-and-jail. This webinar begins our 2018 webinar series for the NBA Prison and Jail Ministries. And today's topic is Lock Up Your Neighbors, How the United States Deals with Immigration. Today's webinar is designed to share information about the scandalous use of private prisons to incarcerate and detain individuals and families who are simply seeking better lives for themselves in the United States. Join us to learn how you and your congregation can get involved supporting those presently being detained, along with their families and loved ones. From those actively working in this area of ministry, you will be given the tools to become an effective advocate for those detained in our immigration facilities. This webinar serves as a resource for addressing the needs set forth in General Assembly Sense of the Assembly Resolution GA 1723, entitled On Becoming Immigrant Welcoming Congregations. This webinar can be used as a tool for discussion and call to action in congregations, regions, and general church ministries. At the end of this presentation, there will be time for questions. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions that emerge, we welcome you to use the Q&A feature by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. Please include your email address so that if we are unable to get to your question, we can follow up with you directly after the webinar is over. To request technical assistance, you may also use the Q&A feature. If you are participating by phone, you may email me at mkilpatrick@nbacares.org. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing on the NBA website in the coming weeks. To begin, let me introduce our speakers. Amilcar Ernesto Valencia serves as the Executive Director of El Refugio. Amilcar is originally from El Salvador. He has been involved in the immigrants' rights movement in the state of Georgia, working with the Latino community and those affected by immigration policies. In 2010, Amilcar was a founding member of the coordinator group for El Refugio, a hospitality house and visitation program at the Stewart Detention Center. And in 2015, El Refugio Board of Directors named Amilcar as its first executive director. He's a steering committee member of Georgia Detention Watch and previously worked for the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. He graduated with a degree in theology from the University of Central America, El Salvador. The Reverend Tiffany Curtis, a Prison and Jail Ministries peer group member and founder and lead organizer of the Santa Fe Faith Network for Immigrant Justice. She's also the pastor of First Christian Church Santa Fe. Tiffany is trained as a clinical chaplain and spiritual director and has worked extensively as a community organizer and in prisons. She grew up in a Spanish-speaking immigrant congregation and has worked for many years on immigration issues. And the Reverend Hector Hernandez is the Hispanic Outreach Coordinator for the NBA Mental Health Initiative. In this role, Hector has particular responsibility for adapting, implementing, and evaluating the NBA Mental Health Initiative design within and in relation to Disciples Hispanic communities across the church. Hector also serves as the NBA Prison and Jail Group peer group convener. Hector is the interim pastor of Iglesia Presbiteriana Nueva Creación, New Creation Presbyterian Church, in the west side of Indianapolis. He has been serving the Latina immigrant community of Indianapolis since 2009. He's an ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ and has an MDiv and a Master of Arts in Marriage and Family Therapy from the Christian Theological Seminary, as well as an undergraduate degree in communications with a minor in visual arts. At this time, I will turn the presentation over to our panelists, starting with Amilcar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica, for the kind introduction. I'm really happy to be part of this panel to share a little bit about the work that we do and just share information about the immigration detention system in the United States. So we're gonna explore some of the larger themes around immigration detention, but we'll start to just sharing a little bit about the work of El Refugio, the Refuge, which is a hospitality house. So we can go next to the next slide, please. So Refugio, as you already mentioned, is a hospitality house, a program that offers lodging, meals, and support to families who are visiting their loved ones at the Stewart Detention Center. Stewart is one of the largest immigration detention centers in the United States, and is located about 2.5 hours from the city of Atlanta. Many individuals have to travel, 2 or 3 hours. If they are from another part of the United States, mostly from the Carolinas, they had to travel 6 to 8 hours to be able to visit with their loved ones. There are no hotels in this small town, so a refugio is a place for them to rest, and we offer also food and friendship to the families. As well, we have a visitation program that allows our volunteers go to the detention center, go into the detention center and visit with people in the facility, some of whom have family members in the United States, but many of them don't have any relatives here, and are in many cases feel lonely and not supported by the community. So we go there and visit with them, just to be present with them, to accompany through the very harsh detention process. Many of them are detained for prolonged periods of time, and sadly, many of them are deported from this facility. So our ministry is a ministry that provides care for the families, but also accompany those who are in the detention center. We go to the next slide, please. This is just a little bit about what we do. Again, offer hospitality, visit people in detention, and we also, provide rides sometimes to the family, those who don't have, either don't drive or can't drive because they don't have a driver's license. Sometimes our volunteers also provide rides to the families. In some cases, the picture in the bottom of your screen, 2 families who stay at a refugio, and the two men in the pictures are 2 people who were released from the detention center who needed a place to stay after their release. And the one in the white shirt was released, and the guards brought him to a refugio. They didn't have, family were not able to pick him up upon his release because they were in Los Angeles. So we'll take them a 4 days, trip to come here and pick him up. So he needed a place to stay. He stayed at a refugio, and then a couple of days later, the family came and picked him up. So that's the other services that we provide. And also to bring people to the detention center, to bring folks, community members, church groups, people of faith to visit with people in detention, just to so they can know how the people in the detention center lives, what are the conditions are, but just showing support and love to the people who are in this situation. You can go to the next one, please. So since we're going to talk about the immigration detention system and how it affects the community. We want to first, acknowledge that some people have strong views about immigration and detention, and some people think that immigrants should be detained. That people who don't have legal status in the United States, they should be detained and deported. And hopefully after this presentation, we have a different view of that understanding of the immigration detention system. So go to the next one, please. And to start with, I think it's also important to say that now in this context that there is a lot of conversations regarding legality and many questions why people don't come here legally, why people don't wait in the line, and name calling of immigrant. That's something that happened through history in the United States, in other places too. And I think it's important to say that being in violation of immigration law doesn't mean that you are, you committed a crime. Is a civil offense. The U.S. government has the right to persecute, I said, but it doesn't mean that you are committed an illegal crime, a crime when you cross the border without documentation. It's a civil offense, and for that offense, you are placed in a deportation proceedings. But the people in the detention center are not serving time, and that's I think the main distinction is that when you commit a crime, the judge and you go to the due process and they give you a sentence. In immigration detention centers, people are not serving time. They're not given time served because they crossed the border. They're waiting for the immigration process to be completed. Either they are released in the United States or they're deported. And mainly the distinction in terms of the name calling, I think it's important to say that no human being is illegal. It doesn't exist. There are illegal acts that you can commit illegal act, but there is no one that is illegal. There's people who have documentation, proper documentation, or approved documentation to live in that state. And there are people who don't. But name, calling illegal to someone is just not. It's not correct. It's not wrong. It's not the right thing to do. Go to the next one, please. And then just to have an idea of, how people are detained or placed in the deportation proceedings, and who are the ones who are placed in the deportation proceedings. Well, it's fair to say that pretty much everyone who is undocumented is at the risk of being detained and processed for deportation, but also people who have legal status. So for instance, people who come here with visas and overstay their visas, they also are in the risk of being detained and processed for deportation. Also people who have green cards, green card holders, permanent residents, they also are in the risk of being detained and processed for deportation because there is probably violations. And when they come in across or in contact with the criminal justice system, that can trigger the immigration laws and can be placed in deportation proceedings. Basically everyone who, comes to our borders or port of entry and are asking for protection, like asylum seekers, including mothers and children, are suggested to detention and deportation. Then go to the next one, please. So the detention, I think it's important to say that the detention of individuals is not just a matter of, security or public safety. There are many layers into the detention of individuals, and by the own immigration statistics, you can just see, the government has statistics about how many people have been deported, how many of those actually have committed a crime in the United States. In 2009, actually only 11% of those deported to their home country had some sort of violations or criminal history. And criminal history doesn't, sometimes it's just, they violated, it could have been minor violations, but it can be also criminal activity that led them to the deportation proceedings. It's statistically, you can, see that actually foreign-born are less likely to commit crimes. And that's something that, you can check and see that, immigrants, the idea of the immigrants here in the United States come to commit crimes is just not, it's just not true. Go to the next one. And then how folks are detained. So there are about 4 forms basically of how people are placed in the deportation proceedings. One of them is through immigration collaboration with localities, through federal programs like Secure Communities, 287G program, and other programs that allow the local police work directly with immigration Department of Homeland Security to detain certain immigrants who come to the localities. For example, someone who comes to the locality because they didn't have a driver's license, or someone who comes to the locality because had a small possession of marijuana or other related crimes. So those who come to the locality and are undocumented immigrants who don't have a driver's license or don't have a legal status can be placed in the deportation proceedings because they check their fingerprints and those are shared with immigration. And that's one of the ways how people are placed in the deportation proceedings. So one infraction in the locality, like no driver's license or other infraction, can lead to the deportation of someone, so the detention and deportation of someone. The other are state laws that are in some states are more harsh for immigrants and allowed more direct collaboration between the state, the local police and immigration to conduct some sort of detention raids, for example, or just the sheriff or the local police is in the business of checking if someone who comes to their jails has immigration status. And that happened mostly like in Arizona and Georgia and Alabama, but other states that have similar state laws that allows them to detain more folks. ICE raids, basically immigration can go to either homes or place of work, and they basically conduct a raid where they can detain people who are in the workplace where they don't have legal status. And everyone who is detained at the border or other port of entry are subjected to detention and deportation. You can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of detention centers or places where immigration sends people so they can await their immigration process or deportation process, they actually are everywhere. In some places are large immigration facilities, for-profit facilities that house between 500 to 2,000 people. In other places, it's just the local jail that is renting a space for immigration so that people can be placed in that locality. So you can see the map. There are, they can be in your neighborhood, they can be in your county, in your state, and there's something that your neighbors are locked out in near you. You can just check the website in Civic, and then you can see what are the detention centers that are close by to you, or what is the county that is detaining people close in your area. You can go to the next one, please. This is just some statistics of the increase of detention and deportation in the last more than 20 years now, beginning detaining about 5,000 people to now more than 35,000 people in detention centers. So this is a huge expansion of detention, and there are many reasons for that. And you can see the spike of the increase of detention in some years. 1996 is when actually detention and deportation proceedings started to ramp up, and because there were some sort of immigration reform that allowed people who follow in certain category be detained and deported, even if they have legal status. And then throughout the years, you can see 9/11 is something that you can see a big spike in there. There is more criminalization of the community. And 2009, 2008, 2009 is actually when Congress mandated the Department of Homeland Security to detain a certain set of people, a set quota, a set number of people who can be placed in the deportation proceedings, and the number was 34,000 people. So any given day, 34,000 people should be detained in an immigration detention facility, or at least there should be a space for 34,000 people across the country. And we'll mention the cost in just a minute, but just to give you an idea, now we're talking about more than 35,000 people in detention center. Last year, I think it's August last year, we had about 41,000 people in detention centers. Go to the next one, please. So what a detention centers looks like? First of all, those who are placed in a large facility are placed in a remote location. Those detention center, again, we work at the detention center in Georgia, one of the largest detention centers in the country, that is about 2.5 hours from the city of Atlanta. This detention center detains immigrants who are detained in the Carolinas and Georgia. So families who live in North Carolina or South Carolina, they had to travel 6 to 8 hours to get there to visit with their loved ones. For that reason, the detainees, people in detention centers are isolated. There is no support from the local community. And in many cases, the local community doesn't know that those detention centers exist, or there are immigration detention centers. That sometimes people say that those are just jail and not immigration facilities, so don't make the connections there. People in the detention center, suffer all kinds of abuse, physical and verbal abuse. Food is something that they complain every day. We visit with them, and we have heard their complaints when we started visiting in 2010 about the food and medical treatment and medical care. If you go today with us and do a visit, you probably will hear the same things. So that's something that is an issue that is present in the facilities, across the board. And there is no legal support provided. So, if you don't have the means to pay an attorney, you probably won't have an opportunity to be released, because having an attorney makes a huge difference in your case. So that's also another roadblock for people who are in detention centers. And if they are able to pay an attorney, that will cost them between $3,000 to $6,000 to hire a private attorney. The government won't pay it if they don't, if they don't have the means to do so. And other issues. We'll share a few stories, and then we'll talk a little about those issues. So we go to the next slide, please. In terms of the cost, you're basically paying, we're paying for every person who is in detention. It's about $2.5 billion a year to the United States. That is basically, that's what taxpayer pay for every person in detention. So if you multiply 34,000 people detained every day for $135 per day, that's how much were we spending, almost like $5 billion a day. The other, we're also detaining people, mothers and children, and those who are detained in those facilities, mothers and children, are cost us about $320 per person. Most of the people who are in detention centers in the United States are in a for-profit corporation, so which means that the government is contracting to a facility which manage and operates the detention of individuals. So 70% of them are actually in those facilities. And CCA, formerly known as CCA, now they're called Core Civic, is one of the largest one, and GU is the other one. The total cost of deporting someone is about $11,000. So it's a lot of money that we're spending in the detention and then in the deportation of one individual. Let's go to the next one. So I'll share briefly about these two men that we have visited at the detention center. One is Ahmed, an asylum seeker from Bangladesh. He came to the United States in 2016 and was detained and deported recently. So throughout his detention and deportation, he has suffered not only mistreatment, but also has been placed in segregation because he spoke out. He has been detained for almost 18 months at this facility. So, which means $72,000 that we have spent just to detain him. And the other story is Wilhelm's story, a person from Guatemala that I have visited, and so some other volunteers have visited at the detention center. And he's been in detention for 2.5 years. He's still in detention. He has suffered sexual abuse, retaliation, has been placed in solitary confinement. His wife presented herself at the border too, and he was pregnant. So his daughter was born here, and he hasn't been able to hold his daughter and kiss her. Until now, we have spent about $121,000 to detain him. So the question here is it necessary to detain people? People who don't have any criminal history? Ahmed came here asking for protection. Wilhelm came here asking for protection, and yet they are in detention, and someone is making profit for their detention. I know I'm a little over time, so maybe I can save some of the questions about my ministry at Refugio. But this is just want to share the story of the families, how hard it is for them. This is a story of Carolina, who came from Raleigh to visit her friend, and she, drove 600 miles to get to Stewart for 1 hour visit. And then, with her broken heart and tears, she had to go back to, her place because in many cases, families come and they don't know if the person will be released. And in many cases, it's just come to say their goodbyes to their loved ones. So families spend money to visit them, to be able to talk to them over the phone, and also, to hire an attorney, to pay the bills and everything. So just the cost for the families, like in terms of the monetary cost, is a lot, but the emotional and all the stress that goes to have someone in detention, and how the kids are, performing in the school, how that affects everyone in the community, and not just one person, because we're talking about the detention of one individual that can affect the whole community. Probably the churches had to do more to provide services to the community. The school has to provide counseling to kids. Kids, performance at school will in many cases drop down, and it is hard for them. So this is what we have seen, and we continue to see in terms of affecting directly the families or those who have already roots here in the United States, who have worked in the United States for a long time, or those who come to the United States asking for protection because they're persecuted because of the political views or because of their religion and other type of persecution. So I'm going to stop there because I know I'm over time, but we'll talk about Stewart later on if we have time.
Thank you, Amilcar. I wanted to share a little bit more about the ministry at El Refugio, and then also a little bit about the work that I'm doing here in New Mexico. You can see from this picture, our prison and jail ministries peer group had the opportunity to visit the El Refugio ministry. And it was really meaningful for me to be there, especially because of the work that I'm doing in New Mexico, and to sort of draw the connections. I was really inspired by the ministry of hospitality that they offer, which Amilcar mentioned, the way that they're able to provide housing and food for friends and family, who are traveling very far to come visit a loved one and who might have had to sleep in their car if they didn't have the access to this hospitality house that they're offering. And another piece that really inspired me and gave me hope is that this house being here, it's only minutes from the gates of Stewart Detention Center, has also provided housing for lawyers and advocates, which has really increased the amount of legal representation for people in Stewart Detention Center, which has increased the number of people who have won their asylum cases or been released. And when we were there, we met a couple of lawyers who had come as volunteers through a program with the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it was really moving to talk to them as well, and about how much collaborating with El Refugio had made it possible for them to come and support people legally who are detained. Each of us got to visit with someone who was in detention as part of the visitation piece of what El Refugio does. And I was assigned to meet with a young man from El Salvador who was out of work, had taken a job that seemed like a good opportunity for him. And it ended up involving some illegal activities that, when he tried to leave the job, threatened his life. He felt that he would be killed for his role and for trying to leave. There was sort of a gang element to the work that he was doing. And it was so striking to talk to him. He had final orders of deportation and was scheduled to be deported 1 week after I was talking to him. And his attitude about this country was really striking. He had been detained right when he crossed the border. He had come with his spouse and their child who had not been detained. But he had been detained, taken immediately into custody, detention. And so his only experience of this country at all was through the lens of immigrant detention. And his view of this country was incredibly, incredibly dark and negative because of that. He saw just total inhumanity, human rights violations, cruelty, evil, really. And so it was very striking to think about how he's going to go share that, with his friends and family now that he's back in his home country, and sort of the way that when people are seeking asylum, they're immediately arrested and put in prison, what that tells the rest of the world about how we understand other human beings in this country is really striking. Monica, do you want to change this slide? One of the things that really broke my heart is that we went in through security to go to our visit, and then we were put in another waiting area where there was a plexiglass window and little speaker devices, that crackly things that we had to talk through to talk to one another. And when we came in to wait our turn, there was still a couple people who were talking to their loved ones through the glass. And one of them was a very young woman. I can't imagine that she was any older than 18. And there was a young man, on the other side in his jumpsuit, detained. And she was sobbing and he was sobbing, and they were pressing their hands up against the glass, as you see in that picture, just wanting any kind of contact with one another. I assume they were a couple. And just the dehumanization, the isolation, the separation of people, the fact that they couldn't even touch hands as they were visiting was so heartbreaking to see. And to see they were so young, and to see the reality that their lives had been torn apart right in front of me was so intimate, and obviously was something that none of us should have been privy to seeing. But the type of conditions that are there are conditions that facilitate that kind of dehumanization of people, isolation, and really heartbreak. So I wanted to share that as well. As I mentioned, you can change the slide, thank you. I am doing work here in New Mexico that is very much related to the work that Amilcar is doing in Georgia. And it was important for me to connect some dots there. A little less than a year ago, with a couple other colleagues, we started the Santa Fe Faith Network for Immigrant Justice. And that was at the request and in collaboration with some of our allies in town. So I've put their logos on the side. So Somos un Pueblo Unido is a immigrant organizing group that is immigrant-led and organizes immigrants to know their rights, to protect themselves, to protect their community. There's also the New Mexico Faith Coalition for Immigrant Justice, which does advocacy and direct service in the immigrant community in New Mexico, the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, and Santa Fe Dreamers Project, which are the only two nonprofits that provide legal services to immigrants in New Mexico. So we collaborate very closely with all of them and started organizing the faith community at their request. And similarly to El Refugio, though we're much newer than them, it has started in a very grassroots way, simply responding to the needs that we're encountering, working to organize ourselves, working to move from the place of our faith that says that all are welcome, and to offer especially opportunity for solidarity between people who are legal residents or citizens and those who are not documented. We have a very important role to play with advocacy with our elected officials as voters that can make a big difference. And we also very much are thinking about how do we use the privileges and accesses that some of us might have to be in support and solidarity. We have a Facebook page. Like I said, we're a very sort of new grassroots organization, not an official 501c3 or anything. So we don't have a website, but we do have a Facebook page that's there, and we post a lot of articles and information. That's a great way to contact us if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing and our process. We have been working at Cibola County Correction Center, which is in Milan, New Mexico. And similarly to Stewart, it's in a rural, isolated area, a poor county that welcomed the opportunity for jobs that seemed like it was going to be offered. It's a smaller facility. It has about 1,000 beds. It was a federal correction center that was run by CoreCivic, and it was shut down in the summer of 2016 due to the death of multiple people who were incarcerated there, 3 cases. That was due to medical malpractice. And quickly, within a couple of months, it was reopened as an immigrant detention center. And no changes to staff or policies were made in those couple of months. So it's a very shocking sort of turn of events, though not so much when you think about who profits from these kinds of transactions. New Mexico does not have an immigration court. So cases from Cibola were being heard in Denver, as well as in El Paso. And there was a study done by the National Institute Immigration Justice Center looking at Cibola and looking at, with this new population that was being detained, mostly as an overflow facility from El Paso, how many people could actually be represented. And they added up all of the lawyers in Texas and New Mexico. If they were working at full capacity, they could only represent 6% of the Cibola population. So once again, as Amilcar said, once people are detained, it's much, much harder for them to find or pay for legal representation, which decreases their chance of winning their case by a lot. Most people, if they're not detained, will eventually win their case, their immigration case, but if they are detained, the chances go down to almost 10%. So about 90% of people will not win their case and will eventually be deported, often after a very long period of incarceration in one of these facilities. At Cibola, we have the only transgender unit of any immigrant detention center in the US. So it's a men's facility like Stewart, but it does have a small transgender population, which last I heard is at 22. It has ranged, from 11 to 22 people. And we have been working along with our immigration lawyer friends to help people both while they're detained in terms of support, help with finding information about country conditions to support their cases. But then also once they're coming out, we have set up a line, a Google Voice line called Cibola Release, and a different one of us answers the phone each day. And when someone is going to be released, we get a call and we help find transportation and short-term housing for the people. So we don't have a house the way they do at El Refugio, but we've had individuals host people in their homes, often for a weekend, because there are some issues with documentation and getting on a plane or a bus or a train that can only be handled during the weekdays. So that's been an important piece of the work that we've been doing. And now we've had 7 people choose to resettle in New Mexico after they've won their asylum cases. So we've also been working with our refugee organizations to figure out ways to support those people in their long-term resettlement process and how to become integrated into the community. Because as we said, most people who are seeking asylum have never spent any time in the United States. They came to the border to present themselves the way that international law requires them to, and were immediately arrested and detained. So their level of connections, linguistic knowledge, that kind of thing is often very, very minimal. We're also hoping that we can do more work with people who are detained, who will not be released, who will not win their asylum cases. As we said, that is the majority of people who are detained. And I think it's really heartbreaking, the kind of isolation that people go through, the kind of abuses and conditions that Amilcar mentioned. And so we need to provide pressure and accountability to these facilities, as well as offering a listening ear or some sense of connection for people. The last thing I wanted to say about Cibola a little bit more is, you can change the slide, is about the profits. And Amilcar went into this a little bit, but I want to go a little bit into the specifics of another facility. So when Cibola County made this deal with ICE and CoreCivic, part of the agreement was that they would receive 50 cents per person per day who's detained that goes to the county. CoreCivic receives a fixed payment of $2.5 million monthly for the facility. And then when the population exceeds 848 people who are detained, ICE pays CoreCivic an extra $55.43 per person per day. So you can see right there, just from that equation, how much it benefits people to keep people detained for longer and to detain more people. So I also think an important piece, and Hector is going to talk a little bit about what we can do, an important piece of what we can do is prevent detention to the extent possible. And we're really fighting against a system that is set up to profit some big corporations and individuals on a per person per day rate, which is really heartbreaking. I think I will leave it at that and hand it over to Hector.
So we're facing evil. This is a rigged system that function or is based on people suffering. It gets fed by separating families, by separating communities, and very few people are getting very rich based on this evil endeavor. And we have mentioned, or we have named these jails as detention centers, but another way to see these are concentration camps. And what they are doing with immigrants and refugees, and you can quote me, I don't have a problem, these are ethnic cleansing. And all this is happening, making wealthy some people. So what is the church called to do? What can we do? What do we have to do is the question. And I could ask you, what are you willing to do? One of my favorite texts from the Bible, from the Hebrew Bible, Micah 6:8. What's that the Lord require of you, of me, of us, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with God. So there is a lot of things that we as a church can do. And I want to share some of them. We don't have enough time to share all of them, but hopefully this will be the beginning of multiple conversations. The next slide. So the first invitation that I will give you is, if you're really, if you're impacted by this and you really want to know more, and you want to connect your church, find your local immigrant advocacy organizations and ask, how can you join effort with them? Just go, figure it out when they're meeting and go, develop a relationship with them, and then invite them to your congregation. Something that I have done is I have invited one of the leaders of Indican, a local nonprofit organization here in Indiana, and she has preached at my church, and she had discussed what our church can do. So it's very important that you reach out, because they are in the trenches. They are already doing, and they have an understanding of what are the immigration policies, what are the rights, how are the families and the community and the state, et cetera, have been impacted by this machinery, this evil machinery. The next slide. So invite immigration attorneys to your congregation, experts who are versed in the issue of immigration and in the issues of mass incarceration. Invite them, let them, I don't know, maybe lead a Sunday class, or invite them to have an open conversation to the church and to the community. Dean Carlos, who is part of the prison and jail, the MBA prison and jail ministry, he suggested this book, The Far Away Brothers. I have not read it, but he suggested this book as an opportunity for your congregation to really begin to talk about this issue, and try to reach out to people who, I don't know, don't want to commit, or they are fearful, or they have other understanding of this issue. And I will really invite you to create as many learning opportunities as you can do, as you can need, to ask for God for, to pray and to organize the church in order to become an immigrant welcoming church and maybe a sanctuary congregation. And I will remind you that in the last assembly, there was a resolution passed, the GA 1723. I will invite you to reach out to that. That could be a good first step for your congregation to explore this issue. The next slide. I will also invite you to take time and enjoy, and explore the movie 13. This film explores the intersection of race, justice, and mass incarceration in this evil system. I think it will help you, and it will help your church to understand the complexity of this for-profit prison industry complex. It's a very difficult movie, but it's a movie that I will really invite you and your congregation to explore. The other thing that you can do, something really easy, is look for places like a Refugio where you live, local places who connect people with immigrant families whose families are inside prison and jail. Reach out in your neck of the woods. They are local prisons or detention centers who have immigrants, and go and visit them. It's not that complicated. And if you are intentional into creating a relationship, I will guarantee you that the Spirit will guide you. And the more you walk the more discoveries you will have. The next slide. It's very important that not just you, but in collaboration and in community with other nonprofit groups, that you continue an exploration of the local states laws that are working against vulnerable communities. I can tell you locally here in Indianapolis, we have to sit down with the sheriff, we have to challenge the mayor, we have to put a lot of pressure, and we did it together. A lot of different clergy, a lot of different denominations, and we won that battle. The war is still on, but we won that battle. And it's up to us, it's up to the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to be the gospel. Your voice, the color of your skin can open doors that some of my communities can never even reach. So call, write to your local representative, to your state senator. Go ahead and meet with them, invite them, learn their positions, and if you need to, challenge them. I was told once by a politician that he didn't care about Latinos because they didn't vote for him. So make your vote count and put pressure. And again, we have to educate ourselves. The rhetoric right now from this administration is a rhetoric of demonizing and scapegoating with the immigrants, refugees, and exiles. The informations that are being shared are loaded with a hidden, well, not so hidden, with an agenda of making money on people's suffering. I mean, when you have jails that has 100 cribs for babies, when your business model operates in a way that women and children have to be incarcerated to make wealth, you know, that's wrong. So educate yourself, invite experts to your congregation, have those difficult conversations within your congregation and within your community. The next one. You have a voice, you have power, and as a church, we are called to use that power on behalf of vulnerable populations. You are not alone. I will even challenge you to challenge your own region. Maybe you can be that person, that congregation who can develop a region-wide prayer service or learning experience. Our regional offices cannot everything. They cannot do everything, what I meant. But maybe you can be that person. Maybe your congregation can be the congregation who can begin to open up and to challenge our region and our denomination. And again, you can be doing that by hosting listening conferences, by inviting immigrant families to your congregation. And if you do that through music, through food, through art, it has a potential to connect us beyond our politics, beyond our worldviews. I participated in an event in which we connected immigrants and artists, and the artists were able to create images or sculptures, create pieces that were telling the stories of these immigrants, refugees, and exiles. And it was an open conversation with the community, and it was very powerful. It was. I saw people crying. I saw people saying out loud, "I didn't know. I didn't know." I have also witnessed experiences in which everything is centered about food, and immigrants were sharing the food from their countries. So again, when you reach out to the community, a lot of possibility happens, and it's up to us, it's up to the church. The next one. Share those discoveries. Don't get fat, you know, share those discoveries and get your region, like I said, and regional ministers involved. And there are other concrete things that you can do with some of the ministries of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. You can sign to receive updates and alerts from the Refugee and Immigrant Ministries. You can reach out to the Disciples Immigrant Legal Council. You can reach out to Obra Hispana or the Central Pastor of Hispanic Ministries. You are not alone. And the more you do, the more you learn, the more you share, you don't know the impact, the multiple effect that you can have. And last but not least, the next slide, reach out to the Reconciliation Ministries, and maybe you can join a transformation team to organize within your congregation, for change. And please reach out to our website, MBA websites. We have done other webinars about these issues that you can use in order to continue this conversation with your own congregation, with your own community. We are the church. And if we don't act in moments like this, I could ask, what are we here for? Many blessings.
This last slide are ways for you to be in connection with El Refugio, especially if you are here in the Georgia or Southeastern region. Volunteer, visit, educate, donate. I too was one of those, a part of that delegation that went to visit El Refugio and Stewart Detention Center. And I will say that Amilcar and his folks make it really easy, even for visitors, to go through that process, to see what it's like. It's a life-changing process. And so I want to encourage you to get connected with them. Or if you're learning, you want to learn, how do you do something like this? How do you do a hospitality ministry in your area? I'm sure this group would be happy to have a conversation, tell you how they got started, tell you some of the loopholes or things you might want to be aware of, to share those lessons so that we can have more places of support for detainees and for their families. Amilcar, do you have any last comments around that before I close this?
No, I just want to say that it is really important to get connected in your own community. Sometimes we think that the issue of immigration detention is so huge and there is not much that we can do. But as you have heard today, there is a lot that we can do. Either it's organizing your own church, your own community, visit someone in detention, organize an event in your church to invite people to provide support to immigrants in your own community. I think that's something that you can do. And if folks would like to visit with El Refugio or get connected with other groups who are doing visitation in the detention centers where you're located, we're happy to make those connections with you all.
Excellent. Thank you. I just want to ask, we're close to time, but I want to ask one question specifically of Tiffany. Earlier, Hector mentioned the text that guides him is the Micah, familiar text, the Micah 6:8 text. And as people of faith, we're always looking for inspiration or instruction or to our tradition to understand how or why we should care about such issues. And the group of us had some conversation around that, and I just love the passage that you use with a new take on why this is important. So if you share that as kind of our closing remark, and then I'll close us out, I'd appreciate it. You're on mute.
Thank you, Monica. I was just saying how there are many, many verses in the Bible that talk about welcoming strangers, that you were once a stranger, all these kind of realities of how we engage with people who are different or who are from a different place from us. And I think those are really important But there also often comes down to this issue of legality, which Amilcar also talked about, like, well, but sure, we can welcome strangers, but why don't people just come here legally? Or why don't they follow the law? And I think it's really important to remember how unjust these laws are. And recently, actually, right after the DACA decision came from the presidential administration, the lectionary reading included Romans 13:10, where Paul writes in the letter to the Romans, "Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law," which couldn't have come at a more perfect time to lift up the fact that any law that is unjust, that doesn't come from a place of love, is not a law that we need to follow or that we need to support. And I think it's really important that we consider, as people of faith, what our ultimate allegiance is. Is it to unjust laws, or is it to the laws of love? And as Paul says to the Romans, if the law is not fulfilling love of neighbor, then it is not a law, because love does no harm to a neighbor. And that's what we have to stand behind. So I think it's really important that we remember that as we go forward in these conversations, and share that when people ask you, why do you care about this? Or how can you support people who are coming here illegally? Help them understand that these laws are unjust, they're totally untenable, and that they are not coming from a place of the love of God.
Amen. Thank you for that. And thank each one of you, Amilcar, Tiffany, and Hector, for your continued work around this, and for sharing your expertise and knowledge and experiences related to immigration and detention. This ends our presentation for today. And as we close, I want us to be mindful as people of faith that we've entered the Lenten season. And among the many action opportunities outlined by our panelists, we also have an opportunity to be in intentional prayer regarding these issues. An immigration-themed Lenten devotion has been developed by the Disciples Home Mission Refugee and Immigration Ministries, along with their partners from the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. The resources focus on 9 immigration and refugee topics, and in particular, to today's webinar is the Lenten devotion for the 3rd Sunday of Lent. You can find this resource on discipleshomemissions.com or .org, discipleshomemissions.org, and then click on Refugee and Immigration Ministries at the bottom of the page. You can also find them on Facebook and connect to that resource there. This ends our webinar, and I want to thank you so much for your time. Please consider the many ways you and your congregation, your community, those that you are in your circle might get involved and further your ministries in becoming welcoming congregations, welcoming communities for those who have experienced or are currently experiencing immigration-related trauma or detention. Today's webinar recording will be available on the MBA website soon for your convenience, and we invite you to share this and so many other resources that are there with others. The MBA hosts monthly webinars with topics related to prison and jail ministries, mental health, our mental health initiative, and other health and social service topics. So please check the MBA website for more information on upcoming educational opportunities and to register. And to get connected to the MBA Prison and Jail Ministries, please email Dean Bucalis, who's our mission specialist, at prisonministries@mbacares.org, or visit our website. Remember to like us on like MBA on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and visit our MBA web page for more information related to Disciples Health and Social Service Ministries. We thank you so much, and we invite you to have a great afternoon.
Many blessings.